So let's get started. Ashley Hurd, so thrilled that you're joining us today. Thrilled that all of you are joining us today. I'm Justin Clifford. I work at Bereave. I will be your host today. Loss Leaders is a program centered around how companies could and we think should show up when loss occurs in the lives of their employees. And this is only our fourth Loss Leaders event, but we are planning on having a program at noon just about every week of 2024. So we're really excited for that. The reason we're doing this, and we get asked this a lot, like, hey, why are you doing this? There's a lot of reasons, but I think the biggest is that Bereave is on a mission to help companies provide the absolute best possible bereavement support when their employees suffer a loss. And in doing that, in that pursuit, we encounter amazing companies and just incredible people like Ashley throughout the world that can bring so much education to business leaders that are working to build a more compassionate and a more empathetic workplace. So instead of hogging them all to ourselves, we wanted to share and get them in front of you. Also, quick shameless plug, because we are a business. We launched our beta bereavement support offering just last month that we're incredibly excited about. Platform coaching and toolkit for supporting loss in the workplace. Super low cost, super low lift, especially for busy HR folks. We're about 8 cents per person per month, as an example, for a 1,000-person company. And we're looking for additional first cohort beta customers that are building a compassionate and empathetic workplace and want to add Bereave to that stack. For any of you that would like to join that, we're also going to do a big campaign to promote your compassionate workplaces at the start of February. So think about press release, badge for your careers page, placement on our website, LinkedIn promotion, all of those kind of things, because it's super important to not just do that, but also to promote the work that you're doing and hopefully your company employment attraction. Hit us up if you'd like to learn more. Now, enough of my nonsense. You're here for Ashley Hurd. Ashley, holy smokes. This was tough. Where to begin? The combination of professional experiences that Ashley has makes her incredibly unique. Corporate counsel at multiple companies, including KFC, Yum Brands. Then, and this is where I think she might be a little off her rocker, decided to take a dual role, general counsel plus head of HR. And then decided to do it twice for some reason that, maybe I'll never really understand. But then 4 years ago, Ashley started Manager Method. And this is where I really gravitate to what Ashley's doing, providing a tactical TikTok style Manager 101 foundation training. And if that weren't enough, she's the co-host of the massively popular new podcast called HR Besties. If you aren't listening, start now. It's hilarious. It's real. It's awesome. And if you aren't following Ashley on TikTok, like the rest of her 175,000 or so followers, start now. And if TikTok isn't for you, because it isn't for everybody, you can also join her and her nearly 20,000 followers on Instagram. She's brilliant, entertaining, real, and hilarious, all wrapped into one person. And we're thrilled to have her join us today. Ashley, welcome to Lost Leaders.
Thank you, Justin. I feel like you're my new hype man, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, I can do that. Okay. It's easy for somebody like you. For you,
written and hang that. Well, if you'll see in the back, I have a sign. My sign in the back says, "I'm trying to lean the right way. You'll miss all the fun if you play by all the rules." So you can see maybe why I did HR instead, as opposed to legal, and gravitated more towards that.
That's awesome. So everybody, chat is open and we'll monitor for questions the best we can as we go. We'll also plan to get you out of here by 1:45 so you can refresh before meetings at the top of the hour. And yes, we will send recordings out by the end of the week. So let's get rolling. Ashley, incredibly generous for you to be here today. Can you talk a little bit about Manager Method, why you created it, and what you hope to change in the workplace through the teams that you work with?
Yeah. So starting out as a lawyer, I was an employment lawyer. So what that means is in litigation, I represented companies that in lawsuits involving wage discrimination, all of those things. I also did counseling, meaning more proactively, hey, this is what you do right and wrong. In the US in particular, different from the rest of the world. And I've worked globally and it opened up my eyes. Even in Canada, Canada is very different kind of climate from the US physically and labor law wise. But in the US, employers tend to win most things. But for me, when I was in litigation and we won, it didn't really feel great because there was always somebody that at the heart of it they didn't feel like they were treated fairly, and felt like it was so unfair that it was potentially illegal. And so for me, doing the counseling, proactive, I really enjoyed that more. So going in-house and working for companies. But when I took on HR, I saw a lot of, disputes that may have gone to legal disputes really started with a lack of communication. And all frequently, I saw where managers were not having communication with their employees, often about things like performance. But really, when you get to the tough subjects like a grief or tough moments in someone's life. And so as I started Manager Method, my North Star was to help managers have difficult conversations. What I'd done for years is to say to a manager, this is how you have the conversation. Here's all these FAQs. You don't need to raise these proactively, but if they say this is what you can say. And, XYZ, to try to upskill or empower managers to communicate when people just don't know what to say. And for better, for worse, I've worked in different industries, seen a lot of situations. And so Manager 101, it's a course I've created that's 5.5 hours to teach managers fundamentals. Some of the things from my legal background, but some of the things also from empathy, delegation, performance management, and how you do that. And I saw a comment you'd done on LinkedIn earlier today that said, well, I took a Management 101 class, and no Manager 101 class would ever teach someone how to respond and have these difficult conversations. And I would say that, well, I know for a fact that's not true, because I am not just the president or client, whatever. I actually have that to talk about how to have those conversations. And I know there's others in this space that are really working to help to empower people, not just to know, the rules of the road, but how to do these things. So I do that. And then for organizations, I have toolkits so that organizations can run follow-up sessions with managers to practice those. So let's say you have someone that is sick suddenly or has a loss. How do you deal with that in this? What do you do from a practical standpoint to help managers to build those muscles that are so desperately needed?
Yeah, desperately needed for sure. I mean, I think I referenced the my own experience of managing people for probably 15 years or so, and I don't know that I've ever I've just based it off of I started basing it off of what I learned by watching my managers, the 12 people that had managed me in my career. And while there were a lot of great things, there were also a lot of things that I probably could have just probably did just completely screw up because never really had a formal training. And I think that's really really common, that most people managers, at least the ones that I know, especially in my sales life, were top individual contributors that were asked into slide into a management role because they were good at what they did, and very few of them had any formal training on how to be a manager. And I know I've dropped the ball in hiring people and not providing that training to the point that I should have. Seems to be very common. Why do you think companies miss this initial training step for new managers?
Well, I think it's not an intentional, like you're trying to set people up to fail. Because if you're
Mhm.
going to ask, any CEO or any leader, they want people to succeed, but often you're not thinking about what that looks like. And they may have been removed from the point in time when they became a people manager. And I think the most common path I've seen is exactly that, is that people, do not receive virtually any formal training. And so they do as they were taught, or they react against what they were taught or saw, and they say, well, I had this kind of boss, I don't want to be that kind of boss, I want to be this kind of boss. But to use a word I hear my husband say all the time, over rotate. People sometimes over rotate. You had like a terrible, you know Luke, my fictional CEO, clueless boss, then you over rotate to try to be super kind.
Mhm.
Well, look at like Kim Scott's radical candor of why that also isn't always the right path, because you may avoid having the conversations that need to be had. And so your attempt at kindness may be short term, but it's really not helping people. And so I think for companies, it's not like it's not like a lawyer, a bar certification. Like, do you have this, a CPA? Do you have your accounting degree? It's something that you just think, well, people can learn this, and a lot of places just assume people will step into it. But the number one path I see is exactly as you talked about, especially in sales, which is, you're an individual contributor. Let's say you're number one, great. Let's teach. Now you can be the manager and teach everybody else your secret sauce. This is going to be a winning combination. But what organizations and all leaders don't really think is, okay, Well, let's think about what that means to be number one in sales. You are probably very competitive. You're used to wanting to do better than your colleagues. It may come natural to you. And so thinking of how do you train new employees? How do you teach the things that you've done that may seem intuitive? And then to the flip side, then what do you do when someone comes to you and has a conflict with the colleague, has a loss, and no one has ever told you how to do that? I think a lot of organizations just don't think about how that's going to happen. And so well, in my videos, a lot of what I try to do is bring awareness of why it's so important to fill those gaps. And I think, if you have nothing else and you just go on social media and read things, that is better. I would rather hire someone that is becoming a people manager that goes on YouTube and goes on TikTok and Instagram and tries to find resources rather than does nothing.
Yeah, totally. So let's talk about the outcomes then, of missing this step and getting first-time managers foundational training. Because I've had a lot of great managers. They didn't have much training, but I've also had not so great managers that also didn't receive training. So it seems like it'd be common sense to provide manager 101, have a management preparation, management track, training course to get people ready for that promotion should they choose to go down that path. But I see very little change other than, really big companies that have the infrastructure to do something like that. Really very little change in some of like the startup scale up world that I typically reside in. If new managers receive 101 training in your mind, or maybe in your experience, what happens if they do receive it? What are some of those outcomes?
Well, from the data standpoint, like Gallup data, for example, will show like
Mhm.
70% of an employee's engagement is driven solely by their direct manager. And so that's huge. And so those business outcomes are, they can be revenue based. So how that employee performs is going to be driven by their manager. And you can also look at plenty of data about retention, how long people stay at your organization, that, in the engagement, meaning how people perform when they're there, the discretionary effort, basically those employees, whether they care or not. And so as you have a manager that has that training, I've seen from very real, what I've been encouraged about is that a lot of organizations I work with are startups, let's say between 50
Mhm.
to 1,000 employees, sometimes a little smaller, sometimes a little bigger. And one thing is like to get people singing from the same songbook, so to speak, to have this like sense of tools, but also having with organizations like a cohort, so managers practice it. And so they're thinking about these conversations. And so what I've seen anecdotally is managers that will say, or leaders that will say, oh, this person had a fire in their belly about management, and they literally hadn't thought about these topics before. And so from empathy and thinking about, how do you navigate things like religion in the workplace, or those topics, how do you do it without being intrusive but being respectful? And what I say is any type of, my manager one-on-one course or things like that I don't have potions. Like I don't have a magic wand that's like, this is what you say in exactly this situation. This is exactly what's going to happen. But there are options, how to think about things, ways that you can say it, and to really be that manager that people, look to so favorably, and that drives the way that people work.
Yeah, I mean, I think about the things that I wasn't thinking about the first time that I took a management role. And I think this is probably pretty common, right? You think you're about to manage business outcomes and performance of a team. And then you kind of look up and realize, well, somebody just came to me and told me something really personal. What do I do with that? Right.
Yeah.
You almost forget going into it. At least I did, that it was people, that you become a people manager. It's not necessarily just a business manager. You are a people manager, manager of people who have lives outside of the four walls of that office. And those lives, as I mentioned, show up at work. And while the ceremonious times in life are usually easier to react to, somebody says, hey, I got engaged, or hey, I'm pregnant, or my wife got a new job, or my partner gets to travel, like exciting things, right? Those are usually easier to react to. Turbulent times can show up just as often. And those can be incredibly difficult. Illness, relationship distress, death, financial struggles, all of those types of things. Can you talk a little bit about how important you consider the way the managers show up in these moments can be? How important is that for managers to show up in a good, in a supportive, empathetic way?
Yeah, I will, because we're speaking to a business audience. I have my hat on where people sometimes are like, "This is soft," and this is, and I'm,
Mhm.
you're Brene Brownish. I love some Brene Brown, but it's all of the. But I try to be very, very real talk. And so second, I'll talk a bit more about the human aspect. But first, let's talk about it from a business aspect, because sometimes that's what's going to get people's attention. Like if I try to talk to people and say, "Oh, you should have support. You should train people. You should provide bereavement support because it's the right thing to do." Then you look, and especially in an economy up and down, things that are the right thing to do and that don't have a quantifiable, and you can't justify numbers to your board, your private equity firm. Those are sometimes things that are going to get cut. So let's talk about the business aspect. And I'll tell you a story of lawyer Ashley. And this is the benefit that I've had of those experiences I talk about where I was a lawyer, I was in litigation, things like that. In litigation, like if you've ever watched The Office, the US Office, and there's an episode called, I think, like the deposition or Michael's deposition, but it's a lawsuit. It's his girlfriend Jan's lawsuit against Dunder Mifflin, and so Michael's diary comes into play, and so everyone at the cafeteria is like reading his diary, and he's mortified. But that type of experience is a pretty real one, and so those that have had the experience, I won't say pleasure, but the experience of going through litigation and having a deposition or having your emails on display. Like lawyer Ashley, very early in my legal career as an employment lawyer, would see things come in discovery and the way people talk to each other at work. And frequently a manager, including in situations when someone has that bad news. And so I've seen exchanges that will say, like, I have, someone revealing or really disclosing a medical condition or talking about a loss. And the response from the manager, I've seen things that will say, like, please don't feel compelled to share such details to me. Or they'll say, I'll CC and HR, will have them handle the details. And when you talk to the managers, because then all of a sudden this is turning into a very expensive conversation because lawyer Ashley is coming with, which now, first year lawyers at big law firms are paid $225,000 an hour. So that has to come from somewhere. So now you're paying a lot of money for people to talk about why you may have said this in an email and what you meant. And frequently out here, managers will say, I didn't mean for them to like feel like they needed to discuss that. I was trying to be nice, or I didn't know what to say. I felt like that was HR. That's HR's responsibility. And so managers rarely stop and think about the other end of that conversation. And they think about, well, this is my job. Maybe you're a manager and you've been told to involve HR in conversations and not have that, and you're afraid of messing things up.
Mm.
Maybe you're charged with hitting these numbers, and this person being out for whatever reason, including their own or sickness or a loss, you're just, you're trying to get through your day and respond to them quickly, or you're trying to be nice and not have them discuss it. But when you say things like that, the way things look on paper, those can have real business outcomes where all of a sudden you are involved in a very costly either litigation, or you have an employee that looks at this and shares it on social media, puts it on Glassdoor. Like, this was my manager's response. And so I say from the business outcomes, everything from litigation to retention and engagement can be driven by how managers act in those awful moments. So giving people the tools and that training, and like, this is how you talk to people. And it's what seems very common sense, to your point, just isn't one. And a lot of us can think about a million things that happen at work that are not common sense. But this aspect of providing people with ideas on what to say often doesn't happen. But the flip side is that human aspect, which is why this is important, is that no matter what we do, whatever my work email address is, whatever my LinkedIn looks like, my resume, my career, we are all on this planet and trying to get through this day as best as we can, wherever you are in your organizational ladder. And the way others support you or not in your toughest moments can be those absolutely defining moments. And so going back to some of that data, is that there was a study beginning about a year ago that showed that a direct manager can have more of an impact on someone's health than their doctor or their
Hmm.
therapist. And it was really eye-opening. And you think about that because if you've had this sudden loss, and what does that look like? Is your manager saying, "Hey, let's please put everything up. We'll talk later, but just for today, and put things aside. We'll figure it out. I'll loop in. I'll get support, and I'm so sorry." You have this empathetic response, or the flip side, where you have someone that says, "Well, we have this. I really need you on things." And while it seems commonplace that someone would not react that way, it is shocking. You can look no further than if I were to do a video like right now that said, like, tell me
Hmm.
your stories about how someone reacted in a loss. The things that people are telling their stories about are those moments, for better or for worse, on how managers react. And so from that human aspect, just really thinking holistically about how am I going to show up for this person? And that
Hmm.
so
So
stuff.
it's almost like you have to managers would have to at least have the seed, have had the conversation before to almost detach the business for a moment from the personal perspective, which obviously can be incredibly difficult to do if no one has even said those words to you, and also depending on where you come from and the baggage that you bring from other managers, you can start to show up like them and the exact opposite of what you would hope to show up for. So is there a moment of detachment that is important here, or are there other ways to kind of think through that immediate reaction from what your face looks like to what your body does to the words that come out of your mouth?
Yeah, I think all of that is really important. And I'd say, I mean, I think it's detachment or it's reprioritization, and just having
Mm.
a pause in your mind where, and this is one of the things I say in like manager 101, which is empathy, which is knowing that no matter what happens, if something big is happening in someone's personal life, they're not going to be able to perform like you'd like them to. But also just telling yourself, I've gotten through like those social media memes that will say like you've survived your worst days so far. And but just having this mantra to yourself, like everything's going to work out on the business side. We will figure it out. Um,
Mhm.
whether that is having others, chip in, whether that is reaching out to someone if there's some big meeting or project and saying, "I'm so sorry. We have to move this." Asking that individual, "Are you comfortable with me sharing with the rest of the team? I want to, taking their lead just to provide context because of the team, and explaining because." If you can't do this, the team may worry. I want to respect your privacy. And also some of the things that you can do to support them. And so I think having that level of reprioritization, which is knowing to yourself, okay, in recognizing as a manager, your first concern might be yourself. To think of what am I
Mhm.
going to do, but intentionally saying, okay, things will get done. Okay, how can I support this person in the moment and figure things out? And it really involves proactively thinking about it. So this is where I say having team meetings and talking in a team,
Mhm.
and not saying what if someone you loved close to you passed. That no, that's not what I'm
Mhm.
suggesting. But saying in a moment, if something happens in your personal life and you have to, you know you need to turn away and can't focus on the business. You're feeling sick. Much better
Mhm.
example at times sometimes, or you have a need. What are ways that we can help and support each other? Because I want to talk about this and have these conversations so that if and when those things happen to any of us as humans, you are not thinking about work, and we are proactively thinking
Mhm.
about that. And so not role playing and trauma dumping or things like that, but just
Sure.
saying, what can we do to be there for support? So it is some of those proactive things that you can do. Um, but then reprioritizing and knowing sometimes uh, you really have to know things will be okay, but also not overpromising. So not
Sure.
saying to someone, "Ooh, take all the time you need, I'll step back," and then 4 weeks later, you haven't reached out to the person, and now you're reaching out to HR saying, "What do I do?" But
Mhm.
just having that moment in time saying, "Well, today, a few days, let me find out what we can do and get back to you to support," but providing the reasonable support that you can, even if you don't
Sure.
know what the options are.
Yeah. You kind of just blew my mind there in the proactive conversation. And you talk about, like, psychological safety and looking up to leaders and feeling really good about your team and your place on that team and your place in that company. To have somebody start a meeting or include in a meeting about, hey, if things go sideways, here's the
Yeah.
plan. to know that exists, I mean, that's got to be massively helpful to anybody to feel okay about what they're walking into. But a lot of people, we hear from people all the time who say, "I wasn't sure if I was going to tell my boss. I
Yeah.
was just going to take vacation, right?
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to be judged and I didn't want my performance to be hurt and all that." But if you have that proactive conversation, right, with every time a new team member joins, this is the expectation of this team. This is how we react for you. This is how we support each other. The word team really starts to take on like the actual meaning of a team. It's not just a bunch of people that report to the same manager. It's actually becomes a team and a place of support. Have you been in one of those conversations, or maybe even started one of those conversations with the team? I'm really curious about kind of how that dialogue gets started, and then B, if you've been a part of it, what kind of reactions that you've seen.
Yeah. So I've been part of that on the receiving end. I've been part of that leading it. And now I've been part of that with talking to organizations saying, hey,
Mhm.
here's a conversation to have. Here's how to integrate this in onboarding. Here's how to have this in a team meeting. If you have a team, you've all worked together and you've never brought this up, this is how to say, this is how to say that. So in those scenarios, where it came up for me was I was an in-house lawyer, and I was on a team. And this wasn't a loss. It was a situation a lot of people have where I had a young child. School was closed, but school was closed because we're in Atlanta and it was cold outside, and so schools will sometimes close
Sure.
because one, because they're afraid of what happened in January of 2014, which was like this ice storm that was like The Walking Dead. I was 8 months pregnant during that, but another time that month it was just closed because it was cold, and I was trying to reach out to my boss. My husband was out of town. I'm home with my child, and I'm trying to reach out, and I remember in my gut feeling so stressed about how can I show that I'm committed when like I have a 2-year-old at home, and I'm able to do my work and figure it out. But I was so worried about that, and I hated that feeling. And so we had a team that was close enough and had built this closeness that we ended up having a meeting to talk about these things, and me to say, I was worried about how it would look like if I was committed. Here's the plan if school is closed. Like, unfortunately, parents will know, like, well, people will be like, oh, backup childcare. Like, Mary Poppins, unfortunately, was not standing in my driveway waiting to leave me for the day.
Mrs.
But
Doubtfire, not there either.
Doubtfire. And so, that moment you think, oh, anything, you're so worried about how you look. And so I think that was a situation. And we had a very like productive crying, like, and most in-house teams may not have that, legal teams, but then having led those conversations in talking about whether it's legal and HR, and even in lean teams, which can be a place that's really hard to say that, because I've had the pleasure of working in teams that would have over 100 plus lawyers who it's easy,
Mhm.
still not easy to slot in, but it's more possible when you're in a team of one, talking to people who are in a function of one and saying, if you have this happen, how can we cross train? What can we do so that our people can cover what's necessary? How also
Mhm.
can we communicate to people internally, externally? This is going to get pushed. Like, how can you build that culture where you don't have that fear of things going wrong? And now working with organizations and mapping this out and saying, here are things to have in a team meeting, and to say how to bring this up, even if you've all worked together, and to say, I wish I'd had this conversation with you a while ago. I didn't, but I don't want another day to go by without raising this, because I think it's important. And if you've ever had this situation where like you wake up, again, not using like the grief as an example, because I don't like that as a role play exercise, but
Mhm.
for a team, but saying like if you wake up and you don't feel like, oh, you have the flu, like perfect winter season, like how do you navigate that? Or if you have something going on in your personal life, like not telling people like they don't have to feel compelled to share what they're not comfortable with, but you want them to know that this is a place that they can have that trust. And whether you use psychological safety, or some people hear that and they shut down. And so saying like, I just want you to know, as you share things, I care about you as a person. And
Mhm.
and I say that, but also these are the ways that I can do that for you, because action matters even
Sure.
more than the words and you're going to say. And so having those proactive conversations, I've been part of it. I've seen it happen. And I
Mhm.
do think it's incredibly important for people to feel that team atmosphere. And many people have never seen that in their whole career. And so it takes time to build that trust of you actually mean what you say.
Sure. And this is, I think this is what a big part of why I love following you and your journey and listening to the podcast and scrolling through your TikTok, is that you take things that appear to be complex, like psychological safety, and you make it like normal speak, not business speak. I'm listening to your Christmas party episode right now, and I think piggyback was your biz blab word that you all had to use. But moving from like psychological safety to I care about you.
Yeah.
Right. You can like it starts off to make it really simple to understand about what that means. And then secondarily, if you show up with action and what that means to care about somebody, that starts to present that environment that I was talking about, that, I wish, looking back over the past 12, 15 years, that I would have been having these conversations. So going forward, this is a great learning experience for me. I hope others out there as well. That's super helpful and very insightful. Thank you for that. I'm curious. We talked a little bit about reprioritization. I used the word detachment, and I think I like your word much better about reprioritizing in that moment. Let's think about somebody sitting in front of a manager and saying, "Here's this hard news," and the manager does reprioritize. The manager does care and flips their mind from thinking about the business to thinking about the person. Then what, right? Reprioritize, number one. So you've kind of flipped that switch. And then, like, can you talk a little bit about response and kind of next steps from there?
Yeah. So I think, being present, giving that person their space and time. Sometimes people just, and even saying some of the things. So one of the things, saying to that individual, to proactively say, I'm literally here for you right now. And whether you want to talk about it, whether you want to get out of here, whether what I will do. Sorry, you may have heard my dog down below. But whether you want to get out of here, whatever, these are the things I want to do here, so that we can help you, this be something that you don't need to think about. And I also will be checking in with you from a human level. So when I'm reaching out to you, that isn't some thing of like, I'm reaching out to you because I care, but I also want updates on these things. When I reach out to you, it's that level. I will be talking with the team. We have plans to cover for each other what we can. I will CC you so you know what's happened. So if meetings get moved, you'll see that happened. You can know that when you come back. And so being clear about your role, because managers are not therapists. Well, unless you're in a therapy program. But managers, being clear, not trying to put yourself and be the savior or be that person's absolute best friend and everything, but showing that level of care and showing what you're doing to help them, and saying these are the things that's my job, is so that you can focus on this aspect of life, and we take things here, and I will have it so that when you're gone, you don't have to think about it, and when you come back, you know what's happened. And even basic steps like that, and thinking about things, saying like, are you comfortable with me sharing this with others on the team or not? I want to respect your privacy, and asking those questions to let them take the lead. And you can often go from there. And so if someone ever asks a question you don't know the answer to, again, saying, let me think on that, get the answers to that, and get back to you as soon as I can. Again, if it's something with like a extended leave paperwork, I may have someone from HR reach out to make sure they handle that, and that your private information is kept private. So it's not a surprise where they're talking to you, they leave, they hear from HR 2 seconds later, and they're like, hell, I didn't know that was going to happen. So being clear about what your role is can be helpful.
Yeah, totally. That's amazing. Is there anything after that clarity and let's say person gets up and has to leave, and you go about, as the manager, you go about doing the things that you said you were going to do. I start to think about like day 4, day 5, day 6, person returns, day 7, day 8, month 1, month 6. Like, what are some of the things that people should be thinking about that continue to support that person, but also help the team in the company all at the same time, because you're kind of crunched in between all three as a manager, right? What are some of the things that are a little bit more ongoing and long tail that managers can be thinking about?
I think it's a fantastic point, because bereavement leave is not a one-time thing. It doesn't last just for the time when someone's gone. In that support is an ongoing conversation. And so when they come back, I understand sometimes work can be a distraction, but I don't want you to feel like you have to like make up for all the time you weren't here. And so easing back in, if there's things I can still, so that you can ease back in a bit more. To the rest of the team, one of the things I hear from people is, oh, this person on my team lost 4 people in a year. We're picking up all the slack. Like, when's enough? And my response to that generally is, grief doesn't tend to become, or bereavement doesn't tend to come when it's convenient for everybody, including the rest of the team. And so sometimes it means people have to work a bit more. Sometimes it means things have to fall by the wayside a bit, and you pick out what you can prioritize. But talking to the team and recognizing it's also a very human emotion to be thinking about yourself and think, well, now I have all this work. Yes, I'm sorry this is happening to my team member, but I'm having to do all of this myself. And so talking to the team and saying, this is, sometimes things happen and things will happen. And so you will have to do, what feels like more than your fair share, but that's something that we can each do for each other, and being there. Sometimes that means that we have to. And so I'm trying to take this on. I'm trying to make it manageable. So talking to those team members so they don't just feel like you're taking them for granted as well, but having those conversations, then the ongoing check-ins, I just think can have a real culture of trust and help. And it builds it where other people do, realize that others are there for them. And it makes people more willing to, pitch in and do those things. Honestly, I found, sometimes it is those individuals that are like the lowest paid members of the team, or the organizations that it's like a government agency where people aren't always compensated for their work, that people are, you sometimes fill that with a close nature. And so those people will chip in, oh, can I donate PTO to this person? And so also as a manager is using some of those situations to look at your bereavement policies and talking internally. You can't often change that as a manager, your whole policy for a company, but policies tend to change based on individual circumstances. So you may say, okay, I saw this, someone on my team literally had like 3 people close to them. Under our policy, they're only allowed 2 instances of bereavement leave per year. Like, can we please push that? Like, having those conversations.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And of course, with sensitive topics, and I even use the example of sitting in front of somebody with sensitive topics, it's ideal, at least in my experience, in my eyes, to be in person if you can. But we don't really have that luxury as much anymore. Can you talk a little bit about tips from handling these conversations from a remote perspective?
Yep. Yeah, it's great. It's because so many people have this. So I think that's why the proactive stuff is arguably even more important in that remote environment, to build those, have in-person meetups periodically when you can, so you can build some of those relationships, but also, developing that and talking about that in team meetings as well. Also recognizing with technology and saying, if someone's texting you and saying, I've had this, this loss, a lot of people text and they aren't going to be on the phone. And so sometimes it's, how can you provide that in a text, that response, and say, I'm so sorry, and take this. And so talking about that in those proactive meetings, saying, if you're going through something, we're remote, you're going through something and you text me, you've just had a loss, I'm not going to make you hop on a Zoom call to talk to me about it. I'll text you back. If I'll offer you, if it's helpful to talk, great, but I'm not going to respond to, the way you're communicating with that, but know that there's that levels of support. And so, having that, the text, some of that text back and forth, hey, I'll check in. And so knowing those words then are even more important. I'm so sorry is words that should be common sense. They're just not to everybody, but I'm so sorry here, and having some of that scripting in advance.
Yeah, I love it. And I'm already kicking myself for my entire management career right now. But we're moving forward, Ashley. Thank you.
Don't do that. It's like I say, and I'm not a wizard. What I've seen especially are some of the worst situations. Being a lawyer, that's the silver lining to that very gray cloud that I lived was that now I can see things and show people how things can be different, and give people to be proactive. So that's my goal.
Yeah. I love it. This is incredibly generous of you. We're about out of time. Thank you so, so, so much. We'll add the links that we shared earlier and where you all can find Ashley in our follow-up recording. We'll do that by the end of the week. We will include the recording is what I meant to say. And we'll be back next week with the co-founder and COO of Support Now, Scott Arrighetti, who, by the way, this is just hitting me, introduced us to
Yes.
Ashley.
Yes.
And you guys are friends and neighbors and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, we are. And I know Jordan, his wife's now become the CEO of Support Now. And so I really love this. I think these tough conversations are tough. They are absolutely needed. And so what you're doing, Bereave, and educating companies on that with Support Now, what they're doing, which if you all haven't seen that, look it up. It's basically, it's the mix of like GoFundMe and things all in one. And it's awesome what they're doing. And so providing these resources to knowing about these proactively is really important.
Yeah, and ditto to what you're doing, and the work that you are doing to get new managers, especially, and obviously old managers like myself could very much benefit from the Manager 101 foundational training and kind of popping backward. So we'll talk to Scott next week, really about how to help organize funds and meals and communication and lending a hand for life's to-do list when things get a little rough and go a little sideways. Until then, have a great week. We'll follow up shortly. Ashley Hurd, thank you so much. We're so grateful for your time and your support and your friendship. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin.
Take care, everybody.
Appreciate